I raised my son all by myself and worked so many long, tiring shifts to pay off the house. It took me 30 years to finally own it free and clear. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and please tell me and others what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late. Share it in the comments below. Thanks. When I retired, I thought maybe he'd feel proud or grateful. But instead he looked right at me and said, "You're just retired, not my responsibility." Those words stung worse than anything. What he didn't know was I still owned the house he was living in. So later, when he got that eviction notice on his doorstep, everything fell apart for him. But honestly, that was just the start of it all. It all began one Sunday morning. My knees were aching, and I was thinking about Brian the way I used to when he was a little boy who needed help zipping his jacket, not a grown man pretending I didn't exist. I had just baked banana bread. He used to love it when he was saddened. I wrapped it up in foil and drove across town with a silly smile on my face. Even though he'd been ignoring my calls all week, when I pulled up, the yard looked too perfect, like something out of a magazine, probably Kelly's doing since she always had to make everything look fancy. As I walked to the porch, I heard them in the backyard, glasses clinking, everyone laughing. Then I heard Brian say, "My mom, please, she's just retired, not dying. She needs to stop acting like I owe her my life." I felt like I'd been slapped. I didn't move. I just stood there holding the warm banana bread, staring at the house I worked my whole life to buy, realizing I wasn't welcome anymore. Someone turned the music up, and Kelly laughed in this sharp, mean way. I backed away without knocking, set the banana bread on the porch table like a sad little offering no one wanted, and walked to my car with my stomach in knots. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, trying not to cry, and glanced at the folder on the passenger seat. Inside was the old deed to that house, the one with my name on it, the one I paid for with every overtime check I ever earned. That night, I couldn't sleep. I reheated one slice of leftover pizza and stared at the cracked ceiling of my tiny apartment, thinking over and over, if they think I'm just some tired old woman they can ignore, they have no idea what I'm about to do. The next morning, I woke up with Brian's words still stuck in my head like a bad taste I couldn't wash out. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my worn-out slippers, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt, even after my husband was killed in that hit-and-run 30 years ago. I made a cup of cheap instant coffee because I can't afford one of those fancy machines Kelly has, and I opened my banking app. The number on the screen, $31,241 to get me through the month, made my chest tight, especially knowing I still needed my blood pressure pills. It's funny how fast your pride disappears when you realize you can't even buy fresh groceries. But the anger I felt hadn't gone away. It was only getting hotter. I scrolled through old texts where Brian promised he'd help out more once things settled down, but things never seemed to settle down when it came to me. Just then, my phone buzzed with a message from Kelly. "Hey Amanda, can you please not drop by unannounced? It stresses Brian out. Thanks." No smiley face, no heart, just that cold little sentence, like I was nothing but a problem. I looked at it for a moment, took a deep breath, and deleted it without replying. Then I walked over to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a stack of old business cards held together with a rubber band. I knew it was time to do something about all of this. I hadn't called Marty Jensen in years. He was the realtor who helped me buy that house back in '93. When interest rates were so high it felt like we'd never afford it. I didn't even let myself think twice before dialing his number. When he picked up, I said, "Marty, it's Amanda Fletcher. You remember me?" He did. He said it had been forever. I told him I had a house I wanted to talk about selling. He asked if I was sure because the market was a little strange right now, but I told him I wasn't calling to hear about the market. I was calling because I still legally owned a house my son and his wife thought was theirs, and I was ready to get them out. There was a long pause. Then he spoke quietly. "I'll be at your place tomorrow morning." After I hung up, I stood in my living room and looked around at my old furniture and the yellowed light switches. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm. They thought I was weak, but what they didn't know was I'd been getting through hard times since before they even knew how to spell mortgage. I raised Brian alone after his dad died. I worked double shifts during flu season, skipped vacations, and never had much rest all so he could have a good life. And now, I was done letting them pretend I didn't matter. Marty showed up right on time the next morning. He was wearing the same brown loafers and big watch he'd always had, though his hair was grayer and his belly a bit rounder. He shook my hand warmly, like no time had passed, and like I was still that young nurse who bought her first home with a strong backbone and a dream. I poured us both coffee mean in an old chipped mug, and his in a clean one I washed special. We sat at my small kitchen table while I pulled out the folder I had tucked away on my bookshelf. Inside were the deed, the closing papers, and every tax bill from nearly 30 years, all with my name on them. Marty flipped through the papers, slowly, nodding. When he didn't see Brian and Kelly's names anywhere, he raised his eyebrows. "You never signed it over?" he asked. I shook my head. Never even thought about it. I told him how I let them stay there after Brian's first business failed. He'd said they only needed a year to get back on their feet. Marty let out a long breath, like he was holding in a whistle. "Amanda, you've got more power here than you think." Those words hit me hard, not because they were new, I knew them deep down, but because it felt good to hear someone finally say it. We went over the numbers and the options. I told him one thing for sure. I didn't want a big for sale sign in the yard. No open houses, with balloons and strangers walking through. I wanted it done quietly, no fuss. Marty understood. He said he could call a few investors, or maybe someone looking to rent. I nodded, trying to act calm, even though my hands were shaking under the table. When I asked if there could be any legal problems, he said, "Nope, you're the only name on the title, it's your house." But then he paused and asked if Brian or Kelly might try to fight it out of spite, maybe drag it into court to slow things down. And right then, something cold settled in my stomach, because I knew deep down they probably would. I thanked Marty and walked him to the door. After he left, I stood in my quiet apartment, thinking for a moment. Then I pulled an old accordion folder off the closet shelf, the one with every mortgage letter, insurance paper, and repair receipt, even ones I paid after Brian moved in. As I looked through everything, I noticed something strange: a scanned refinancing application from 2018. My name was typed on it in sloppy letters, and the signature looked off. My heart started to pound. I knew my own handwriting. This wasn't mine. My hands were shaking as I realized what I was holding. Brian had tried to refinance the house into his name behind my back, using a fake signature. I sat down hard on the couch, staring at that forged signature. Something in me changed right then. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was a cold, sneaky betrayal. They hadn't just taken my kindness for granted. They'd tried to steal what I worked my whole life for. I picked up my phone and called the only person I trusted with paperwork, Carol Idle, a retired paralegal and old friend from the hospital. She used to help me figure out all the fine print in my union papers. She answered on the second ring, and when I told her what I'd found, her voice went from friendly to serious in an instant. "Amanda," she said firmly, "bring me everything, today." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just pulled out a new manila folder, labeled it War, and started making copies like a woman who'd finally stopped hoping her son would remember who raised him. Then I took the bus across town, clutching that folder to my chest, like it might get ripped away if I loosened my grip. When Carol opened the door, still wearing her reading glasses and that old Loyola hoodie she loved, I could tell from her face she was already in work mode. The kind of calm, determined energy that used to help me breathe when the hospital felt like it was falling apart. We sat at her kitchen table while she read every page, her pen tapping the wood as she thought, and when she got to the forged signature, she muttered, "Jesus, Amanda, this isn't just careless, this is criminal." Carol got right to work with her red pen, marking things up and asking me all sorts of clear questions: dates, bank accounts, any phone calls I might have missed. That's when I realized how many little things I'd brushed aside over the years. All those times Brian brushed off my questions about mail I never saw. How Kelly always insisted on paying the bills herself. How they somehow had a brand new flat-screen TV but kept telling me they were broke. Carol spelled it out plainly. If Brian had tried to file a new deed or mess with the mortgage using my forged signature, and if I could prove I never agreed to it, I could not only evict them, I might have a legal case, maybe even criminal charges. But instead of feeling like I'd won something, I just felt sick to my stomach. I kept thinking, how did we end up here? How did the little boy who used to hold my hand and cry when I went to the hospital grow into someone who could look me in the eye and lie, someone who'd steal from me so easily? Carol told me not to get lost in my thoughts, to stay focused. So I did what I always do when life feels too big. I made a list. First, confirm with the county that the house was still in my name. Second, pull Brian's credit report to see if he'd used my name for anything else. Third, start gathering eviction papers in case he didn't leave on his own. Later that afternoon, Marty called. He said he had a serious buyer and quiet investor who paid in cash. No fuss. I told him to move forward but to keep it private. No signs, no open house, no balloons. He promised he'd handle it. That night, I sat on my old couch with a bowl of soup and scrolled through Brian's old text messages. They read like they were from a stranger. "Thanks for the help, Mom. I promise I'll pay you back. We'll have you over for dinner soon. You're the best. I don't know what I'd do without you." Now each word felt fake. Just then, a new message popped up on my screen. It was from Kelly. "Just checking, can you please bring the air purifier next time you come over? Brian says you have one. The baby's been congested." The baby. I just sat there staring at that word, shocked. No one had told me they were even expecting, and now they had a baby in my house. A baby they didn't think I deserved to know about. I didn't text back. I turned off my phone and sat there in heavy silence, the kind that doesn't feel peaceful, just cold. That was when it finally hit me. This wasn't about trying to be fair or understanding anymore. This was about standing up for myself before they erased me completely. 2 days later, the official notice went out. Big black letters on thick paper. Hand-delivered by the process server Marty hired so nothing could get lost in the mail. Part of me almost wished I could see Brian's face when he opened it. But the other part, the part of me that was tired and quietly furious, just sat on my bed, staring at my phone, waiting for the storm I knew was coming. It didn't take long. Brian called 3 times that afternoon. He left 2 voicemails. When I didn't pick up, he started texting. "Mom, what is this? You're joking, right? You really think you can kick us out?" But I didn't reply. Not yet. I wanted the silence to last, to show him I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't going to cave this time. The next day, I decided to go over in person. Not because I owed them any explanation, but because I wanted them to look me in the eyes when I said it. The house looked the same as always, but colder, like a picture someone staged for a magazine, instead of a place full of memories. Kelly opened the door with her hair up in rollers and an annoyed look, like I was interrupting something important. "Amanda," she snapped, "is this about that letter? Brian says it's all a mistake." I didn't answer. I walked right past her into the hallway. There was Brian in the kitchen, wearing sweatpants and no socks, looking like a boy who'd been caught sneaking cookies. He opened his mouth to start his excuses, but I didn't let him. I pulled the deed and the papers with his forged signature out of my bag and set them on the counter. My voice was steady when I said, "You have 30 days to leave. The house is sold. You don't live here anymore." The whole room went silent, like someone had sucked the air out. Kelly looked from the papers to Brian to me, her face pale. Brian looked like he couldn't decide if he should scream or start crying. "You can't do this," he finally said, his voice shaking. "We have a baby. You're really going to kick out your own grandchild?" I lifted my chin and looked him right in the eye. "You didn't even tell me you had a baby. And you tried to steal this house with a fake signature. Don't you dare talk to me about family." Kelly grabbed the baby monitor off the table, like it was a shield. "This is insane," she muttered, but she couldn't look me in the eye. Brian slammed his hand on the counter. "You want us homeless? Over money?" I shook my head slowly. "No, over respect, over honesty, over all the years I gave up everything for you while you laughed behind my back and pretended I didn't matter. They thought I was just some washed-up burden." But I didn't wait around to hear more yelling. I turned, walked out the screen door, and let it creak shut behind me. As I got in my car and drove away, I didn't feel angry or even satisfied. What I felt was something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. I realized I wasn't just taking back a house. I was taking back myself. It only took about a week for the cracks to show. And this time, I didn't have to imagine the look on Brian's face when it all sank in, because he decided to broadcast his meltdown to the whole world on Facebook. First, he posted something dramatic: "Evicted by my own mother. Hope your conscience is clean." Then he put up a bunch of pictures of the house, trying to paint me as a cold-hearted woman who turned her back on her own family. But the comments didn't go the way he hoped. People remembered when I raised money for Kelly's sister during her cancer treatments. They remembered the Thanksgiving dinners I cooked for half the neighborhood when Brian was little. Slowly, people started standing up for me, not because I said anything, but because they knew what kind of mother I had been. None of it made me feel happy. Not really. Even as the eviction date got closer, I couldn't stop thinking about the baby I hadn't met and the nursery I'd never seen. It broke my heart to know there was a child in that house, a house that once held Brian's first steps. And now it felt like nothing but a battleground covered in cheap flooring and bad feelings. Marty kept me updated. He said the buyer's inspection went smoothly, the money was ready, and the closing date was set for 2 weeks out. But he also warned me that Brian might try to stall things or even fight back in court. And sure enough, he did. One day, I got a voicemail from a lawyer's office. They said they were calling to confirm I knew about a claim that questioned whether I was mentally fit to manage my own property. My heart just about stopped. I almost dropped the phone. I never thought my own child would pull something like that, but it was real. Brian had filed a petition to make it look like I wasn't in my right mind, hoping to freeze the sale and take control. I called Carol right away. As soon as I told her, her voice turned sharp. He's playing dirty now. Good, so can we? For the next 2 days, we gathered every medical record, every witness statement, and every paper that proved I knew exactly what I was doing. Carol even called a lawyer she used to work with, and he agreed to help for free. After he read what was happening, the judge threw out Brian's claim before it even made it to a hearing. He said it was unsubstantiated and clearly retaliatory. When I got the email confirming the dismissal, I sat down and finally let myself cry. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in so long, someone stood up for me without making me explain why I deserved it. A few days later, I heard that Kelly had left Brian. One of my old book club friends told me Kelly had packed up the baby and gone to stay with her sister across town. She said she couldn't take the chaos anymore and was tired of Brian blaming everyone but himself. Brian tried to act like it was just a break, but I saw the moving truck outside the house one morning, and I knew it wasn't temporary. I didn't talk to either of them in those last days before the sale closed. I didn't offer help or ask questions. I just waited, quiet and steady, the same way I'd stood on that porch weeks earlier with banana bread in my hands. Only now, I held something strong, a power, the knowledge that I'd survived the storm my son created. The house sold that Friday at 2:13 p.m. I watched the money show up in my account in one clean wire transfer, and just like that, the last string, tying me to the old life where everything revolved around Brian, was cut. But I didn't feel empty, I felt lighter. After the sale, I didn't celebrate like some queen on a throne of revenge. I didn't buy an expensive dinner or go out for champagne. I just went home, opened the junk drawer in my little kitchen, and pulled out an old bronze key with a faded orange tag that said Store 238. I hadn't touched that key in more than 15 years. It opened a storage locker I kept paying for out of habit, a little metal room full of things I'd packed away after Brian moved into that house and told me it was time to let go of the past. I hadn't been back since the day I locked it all inside. My late husband David's old duffel bag from Vietnam, our wedding album, Brian's baby clothes, envelopes of all the vacations we never took. I never had the nerve to throw those things away. But with the house finally sold and all the noise of my old life fading into quiet, I felt this pull in my chest to see what had survived all these years. Like I needed proof that not everything I built had been ruined or turned ugly. The storage place was across town near the old freeway exit. It was dusty and gray, one of those forgotten corners of the city that time never visits. When I turned the key and rolled up the metal door, the stale air came at me like an old perfume I almost recognized. Heavy with dust and memories, the boxes were still stacked neatly, each one labeled. I knelt down and opened the one marked David. Inside was his soft leather journal and a little tin of war medals he never liked to talk about. For a moment, I just sat there on the cold concrete floor, my palms on my knees, breathing it all in, remembering how strong I used to be before everything got tangled up in Brian's needs and disappointments. Then I opened a smaller box I didn't even remember packing. Inside was a folder stamped with travel documents, plane tickets, brochures, hotel bookings. They were for the trip David and I had planned to Cuba in 1992. We were going to drink rum in Havana, dance to live music, and sit on the beach like two people who had all the time in the world. But after his accident, life stole that from us. I never even canceled the plans. I just shoved the papers into a box and told myself I'd go someday. I sat back against the wall, holding those yellowed papers in my lap. For the first time since all this started, I didn't think about Brian or Kelly or the baby I hadn't met. I thought about me, about the version of Amanda who still had dreams, who used to look forward instead of always looking back. When I locked the unit and drove home, I pulled out my laptop. My hands hovered over the keys for a moment. Then I typed flights to Havana into the search bar. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't explain. I just booked it one way, paid in full. When the confirmation email came through, I didn't cry or laugh or even smile. I just sat there in my little kitchen, listening to my old refrigerator hum, and felt a quiet kind of victory settle into my bones. I didn't pack much for Havana. Just a carry-on with a few linen clothes, my passport, that folder of travel papers, and David's journal tucked between two sweaters. I wanted a piece of him with me, even if he never got to see that ocean himself. The morning I left O'Hare, the sky was bright. As the plane lifted off, I looked out the window and whispered goodbye to Illinois, not with tears, but with a steady calm, like I was closing the door on a chapter I'd read too many times, hoping it might end differently. The flight was smooth. The hotel was simple but clean. For the first 2 days, I barely left my little balcony except to wander the side streets and buy fresh fruit that smelled like sunshine and sugar. I wasn't there to sightsee. I was there to remember what it felt like to be a person without guilt or shame pulling at every decision. Somewhere between the quiet mornings and my long walks along the water, I started breathing deeper than I had in years. I wasn't thinking about whether Brian had found another place to live or whether Kelly was settling into single motherhood. I was just existing, like someone who had finally stepped out of the shadows of her own life. On the third day, I sat at a cafe near the Plaza Vieja sipping a mojito, watching two teenage boys argue over a chess game with so much fierce joy that I laughed out loud. That was when it hit me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed without bracing for someone else's reaction. Later that evening, I took just one picture of myself on the beach, wearing a big sun hat, holding a drink. I attached it to an email to Brian. The subject line said, "Retired, not dead." I didn't write anything else. There was nothing left to say and no apology I needed to give. I didn't even check if he replied. That night, I sat on my hotel balcony with David's journal in my lap, flipping through the messy handwriting where he'd scribbled all the places he wanted to show me. I whispered, "I made it, babe," into the soft Cuban night, and hoped the breeze would carry it somewhere he could hear. I wasn't planning the next chapter of my life yet. I wasn't interested in plans, just moments like watching the sun sink into the ocean without a schedule, or falling asleep without my mind screaming for attention. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel forgotten or left behind. I felt free in a way that didn't need an audience or approval, just a sky wide open, a heart still beating, and a name that finally belonged to me again. I'd just come back from walking through a tiny local market where I bought a hand-woven bag from an older woman who reminded me of my mother's stern but kind. I was sitting on my balcony, drinking iced tea and letting the breeze play with the hem of my dress, when the front desk called to say I had mail. It startled me because no one knew this address except the hotel and the airline. But curiosity pulled me downstairs, barefoot and puzzled. The clerk handed me a white envelope with my full name written across the front in neat cursive. It was postmarked from Chicago. I knew the handwriting right away. It was Kelly's. And as I climbed the stairs with the envelope in my hand and my thoughts swirling like loose laundry in a storm, something in my chest tightened, because the last real words we'd spoken had been bitter and clipped. And I had never imagined, I never thought I'd hear from Kelly again. But there I was, sitting back down in my chair in Havana, sliding my finger under the flap of that envelope with my heart thumping in my chest. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No photos, no cards, just a letter written in neat black pen, like she'd started over and over before she finally got it right. She said she was sorry. Not just for how they treated me, but for all the years she didn't speak up, for letting Brian push me out, for not telling me she was pregnant or inviting me to the baby shower. She admitted she had known about the refinance attempt but believed Brian when he swore it was all above board. And now, with everything fallen apart, she saw him clearly a man who hid behind charm to cover up his fear, who blamed everyone else when he failed. She told me she had left him for good. She'd moved in with her sister and found a part-time job at a dental clinic. She also wrote that her baby, my granddaughter, was healthy and beautiful and had my eyes. Kelly said she wanted her little girl to know where she came from, to grow up hearing the truth about the woman who worked night shifts so her father could go to college, the woman who bought a house and stood up for herself, even when everyone told her to sit down and be quiet. Kelly asked if she could send me pictures. She wasn't begging for anything else, just a chance to do right by her daughter. Maybe, she wrote, someday we could rebuild something small between us, if I ever felt ready. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it neatly and set it beside my drink. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the urge to write back right away. I didn't fall into that old, heavy sadness. I just sat with it, the way you sit with a story that isn't yours to fix, only yours to understand. I didn't feel pressed to forgive her, punish her, just a quiet sense that maybe, in some small corner of the universe, there was still a thread connecting me to the future. Not through Brian, but through a little girl with my eyes, who didn't yet know how messy love could get. How people can hurt each other and still be tied together by something real. How the ones who get pushed aside often end up building stronger homes out of their own silence than out of any apology. I stayed in Havana almost a year, long enough to let the quiet soak in, to let the slow rhythm of that place smooth out the rough edges I'd carried for decades. And when I finally felt that pull again, not of guilt, but of readiness, I booked a ticket back to Illinois. Not because I missed it, but because I wasn't afraid of what was waiting anymore. I didn't return to my old apartment. I didn't try to pick up where I left off. That story had ended the day I walked off that porch with banana bread in one hand and the house deed in the other. Instead, I used some of the money from the sale to buy a simple condo in a quieter part of town. It had big windows and enough sunlight to grow a few herbs on the sill. I was surprised by how little I needed to feel at peace. The real turning point came one rainy Tuesday. Marty called to tell me that a buyer had backed out of a deal on a rental property, and it was up for sale at a good price. It was in the very same neighborhood where my old house used to stand. Before I could talk myself out of it, I asked him to send the listing. It wasn't fancy, a 2-bedroom duplex, but something about it felt right, like a circle closing. Within a week, I bought it outright. No loans, no drama, just a wire transfer and a deed in my name. I didn't plan to live there. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I listed it through a property manager at market rent, with strict tenant screening. A few days later, I got an application from a man named Brian Fletcher, recently separated, looking for someplace close to his new job. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't approve or deny the application myself. I let the manager handle it by the book. And when I saw the signed lease come through, I sat in my new living room with a cup of tea and a smile that wasn't cruel, just final. Every month, like clockwork, the rent shows up in my account. It's labeled with the tenant reference BFW73, and I don't say a word. He doesn't know I own the place, and I don't need him to, because I've learned that real power doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, it's just deciding who gets your voice and who only gets your silence. I've donated part of that money to the Nursing Scholarship Fund, because there are still young women out there like I was once, determined, tired, hopeful, and they deserve to build something of their own, too. I used to dream about starting fresh, and in a way, I finally have. I've signed up for a weekly watercolor class, something I never made time for before. And lately, I've received 3 handwritten letters from Kelly. Each one has a photo of a little girl with dark curls and big eyes that look so much like mine it almost takes my breath away. I haven't met her yet. I don't know when, or if I will. But when I feel ready, I write back. I keep my words careful and calm. I'm not chasing anything anymore. I'm just here, being present in my own life. I've stopped saying sorry for taking up space. I don't shrink myself to make other people comfortable, especially people who never understood how much it cost me to be kind. And now, every time I get that rent notification on my phone, I smile, not because of the money, but because it reminds me of something simple and strong. No matter how late you decide to take your power back, what belongs to you will always find its way home, especially when the place it's searching for was never really lost in the first place. That's today's story. If it touched you, leave a like and subscribe. And don't forget, share your own life lesson in the comments below.